They arrive like something untouched by war. A new armored group, freshly issued machines, paint still clean in the seams, track links still sharp-edged, stowage neatly tied down as if for inspection. The crews sit upright in their hatches, faces young, posture confident. They have been told they are needed only for one thing, to stop an Allied advance at a road junction that matters more than it looks on the map. The order is simple: move fast, hit hard, restore the line. In the staff tents behind them, the situation has been reduced to arrows and distances. Reports speak of scattered resistance, tired enemy units pressing forward on momentum. The armored group is sent into the sector with the quiet assumption that armor, properly applied, will impose order on the chaos. The column rolls forward in tight formation, engines steady, steel moving like a single idea. Then the first impact lands. The lead tank lurches, an abrupt, unnatural halt, as if the ground itself has reached up and seized its tracks. No muzzle flash is seen, no enemy silhouette, just a blunt force that turns speed into stillness. The commander's voice snaps across the radio, asking for contact reports that do not exist yet. Before the question can be answered, a second vehicle erupts, this time from the flank. Flame blooms beneath armor plating. Black smoke pours out in a disciplined column, too clean at first, then thickening into panic. The road is instantly narrowed by wreckage, the formation compressed behind it. Radios crackle with clipped, rising urgency. Where are they firing from? Gunners traverse turrets toward hedgerows and tree lines, firing at guesses. Infantry, meant to screen and spot, struggles to deploy in the open. The clean vehicles now carry the first scars: shattered optics, splintered fenders, track pins snapping under strain. And in the first minutes, the fresh group understands something that experience teaches only once. It has not arrived to fight a battle. Section 2, the advance that looked easy, tilde 300 words shock. It had looked, on paper, like an easy correction. Back at German headquarters, staff officers studied the reports with a familiar instinct. The Allies were moving fast, which meant they must be stretched thin. Fuel lines lengthened, infantry lagged. Armor, they believed, could not be everywhere at once. In that assumption lived a dangerous comfort, the notion that momentum always creates vulnerability. Reconnaissance seemed to confirm it. Open ground, few confirmed enemy tanks, road nets that invited a quick thrust. The phrase passed down the chain with quiet certainty: restore the line quickly, not hold, not delay, restore, as if the front were a curtain that could simply be pulled back into place. The new armored group absorbed that confidence like warmth. These crews had trained for movement, for decisive contact, for the clean geometry of doctrine: advance, engage, exploit. They trusted in armor and speed the way earlier armies had trusted in cavalry. If the enemy was tired, a sharp blow would make him recoil. So the commander drives for tempo. To maintain pace, the column tightens. Vehicles close distance to avoid gaps, to keep the group coherent on narrow lanes and bends. In theory, a compact force is easier to control. In practice, it becomes a single target, each tank a measurement point for the guns waiting ahead. The enemy does not need a large number of tanks. He needs patience, angles, and prepared ranges. The density of the column becomes data. The road becomes a ruler. When the first tank is struck, the following vehicles cannot spread out. They cannot vanish into open maneuver. They stack up behind steel they cannot pass, every minute adding weight to the trap. Dust rises from breaking tracks and sudden turns. Engines rev, then idle, then rev again, uncoordinated, anxious. And the optimism that had traveled with them, born from maps, from staff calculations, from the belief that speed equals safety, dies quickly in the first minutes of confusion. The advance had looked easy, only because the battlefield had been read from too far away. The most unsettling thing is what they cannot see. There is no clear enemy line, no advancing silhouettes, no obvious flash of gunfire to answer with instinctive precision. Instead, the impacts arrive first, metal punched inward, track links shattered, optics clouded in dust and splinters. The sound comes a fraction of a second late, echoing back from unseen positions. Anti-tank guns fire from concealment, then fall silent. By the time German gunners swing their turrets toward the hedgerows or tree lanes, the guns have already shifted. Crews fire anyway, shells tearing into greenery, bark, and empty ground. It is return fire without confirmation, noise meant to reassert control more than destroy a target. Above and behind them, Allied artillery begins to bracket the road. The first rounds land wide, testing distances. Then they tighten. Explosions walk forward and back along the junctions and escape routes, sealing them not with walls, but with time. Any attempt to reverse or redeploy draws immediate attention. The battlefield is no longer just the road, it is the invisible grid drawn over it. German radios hum with overlapping reports. Each tank crew sees only its own fragment, a burning vehicle ahead, a stalled engine to the rear, smoke where infantry should be moving. No single voice can assemble the whole picture fast enough. One disabled tank becomes a fixed obstacle. It sits across the lane at an angle that cannot be bypassed under fire. Attempts to push it aside fail. Tracks spin uselessly, throwing dirt into the air like signals. The column fractures around it, not physically, but tactically. Each vehicle now fights its own small war, bound by proximity yet isolated by confusion. The ambush has no face. There is only pressure, from the flanks, from above, from the sudden understanding that every pause is observed. Time, once an ally of momentum, now belongs to the unseen enemy. And with each minute, the fresh armored group loses not steel, but coherence. Freshness is often mistaken for strength. These crews had not been worn down by months of combat, had not learned caution the hard way, had not developed the silent choreography that veteran units carry into a fight. Their vehicles were new, their equipment complete, their training recent. On paper, it looked like readiness. But war does not test what exists on paper. It tests timing under fear. They knew procedures, spacing rules, immediate action drills, radio discipline. Yet those procedures lived mostly in classrooms and exercises, where mistakes could be corrected with calm voices and repeated runs. In a real ambush, the difference between knowing and doing is measured in seconds. Overconfidence fills the gap where experience should be. When the first impacts strike, small habits reveal themselves. A commander stays exposed too long to find the shooter. A driver hesitates between forward and reverse. A gunner fires too early, giving away position without gaining information. Radios, meant to coordinate, become crowded with simultaneous questions and partial reports. Officers lean on doctrine, because doctrine is familiar. They try to solve the battlefield the way they were taught, identify the threat, suppress it, maneuver around it. But the ground offers no clean answers. Hedgerows hide guns. Ditches punish sudden turns. Artillery makes every open movement a gamble. Doctrine begins to feel like a map drawn for a different country. Spacing closes, without anyone ordering it. Scanning narrows to tunnel vision. Communication becomes urgent rather than useful. And the enemy senses it immediately, not the fear but the hesitation. A well-prepared defense can feel when an attacking force is unsure of what it is seeing. The fire tightens. The ambush becomes bolder. Shots begin to land where they matter most. Tracks, sides, optics, commanders' hatches. A veteran unit might have reacted like a body, automatically dispersing, marking likely gun lines, moving infantry into the hedgerows, creating its own counter-ambush. This one reacts like individuals. And that is the hidden cruelty of the word fresh. It means unscarred. It also, even as the situation darkens, the belief at higher command remains intact. For years, armored counterblows had been the answer to crisis. When the front bent, steel was sent forward to straighten it. Tanks were not merely weapons. They were instruments of authority, meant to impose order on confusion through mass and movement. That belief had worked before, often brilliantly, and success hardens ideas into doctrine. The plan still rests on assumptions. It assumes Allied infantry will hesitate when confronted by advancing armor. It assumes anti-tank guns will be few, slow to shift, and vulnerable once revealed. It assumes coordination between enemy guns, artillery, and infantry will break under pressure. Above all, it assumes the battlefield can be understood from a map table. Reports from the armored group arrive fragmented and tense, but not yet catastrophic. Words like delayed, engaged, meeting resistance are interpreted as normal friction. Staff officers hear what fits expectation. A counterattack, they believe, must push through resistance, not pause to analyze it. So the order remains unchanged. Advance. The armored group is urged forward, not because conditions favor it, but because stopping would imply that armor no longer dominates the fight. To halt would be to admit that steel cannot simply reassert control by presence alone. Pride becomes operational policy. Warnings about terrain, about unseen guns, about the density of fire, are treated as obstacles to momentum rather than information. The belief is that clarity will come once the enemy is forced to react. Initiative, in this thinking, creates understanding. But initiative without comprehension is only motion. The counterattack begins in earnest before the battlefield has been read, before the enemy's system has been identified. Tanks move forward not into opportunity, but into a design meant to absorb and dismantle them. And in that moment, German command commits its most dangerous assumption of all. That conviction can substitute for visibility. That armor, by advancing, will make the battlefield reveal itself. Instead, it drives deeper into what it does not yet understand. With hesitation growing and pressure from above unrelenting, the local commander makes a decision that feels inevitable. He orders a forward surge. The logic is familiar: break contact by overwhelming it. If the ambush can be pierced, the guns behind it will be forced to displace, and the road will open again. Stopping, under this doctrine, is more dangerous than moving. Engines roar as tanks lurch ahead through smoke and dust. Visibility collapses into fragments, brief glimpses of hedgerows, flashes of track, silhouettes of burning steel. Crews fire main guns at likely positions, not confirmed ones, shells slamming into earth and foliage in the hope that suppression will replace certainty. It does not. Without clear targets, firepower becomes noise. Ammunition is spent to buy seconds rather than results. Each round fired announces position without silencing the unseen guns responding from the flanks. Infantry support cannot keep pace. Pinned by machine gun fire and artillery fragments, foot soldiers struggle to advance across open ground or into covered lanes already under observation. The space between tanks and infantry grows, a gap that anti-tank teams know how to exploit. Engineers, meant to clear obstacles and open alternate routes, find themselves unable to work under continuous fire. The surge slows. Not suddenly, but steadily. Each disabled vehicle forcing the next to brake, each burst of artillery forcing crews to button up and lose awareness. Momentum bleeds away in meters gained at unacceptable cost. The commander faces an impossible choice, one that doctrine does not prepare him for. Advance and dive forward, or halt and be dismantled in place. Every option feeds the enemy's design. Pushing concentrates the column. Stopping fixes it. The battlefield has become a machine that converts movement into exposure. And somewhere between belief and reality, the armored group crosses an unseen line. The Allied defense does not fight the German tanks as heroic targets. It fights them as a system to be processed. The first principle is simple: freeze the column. Allied gunners aim not for glory, but for geometry, lead vehicles and rear vehicles. A hit on the first tank turns the road into a barrier. A hit on the last turns it into a cage. Between those two wrecks, steel stacks up in helpless order. Then the second principle begins. Deny choices. Artillery strikes the crossroads and likely retreat lanes, not because it must destroy everything, but because it must make movement costly. Shells land on junctions, bridges, bends, places a vehicle must pass through if it wants to escape. The German commander is not merely under fire, he is being herded. Anti-tank guns exploit the new reality. They do not waste rounds on frontal armor when angles can be created. They aim for tracks, for side plates, for the vulnerable points revealed when a tank pivots or tries to climb a ditch. A mobility kill is often enough. A tank that cannot move soon becomes a tank that cannot live. While the guns hold the lanes, infantry closes in where armor is blind. Handheld anti-tank weapons and grenades move through cover, hedgerows, sunken lanes, folds in the ground. They approach from angles a turret cannot easily traverse, from distances where even thick armor feels fragile. It is intimate fighting, brief, violent, and shaped by terrain. Above it all, spotters and observers keep the mechanism tight. Corrections arrive quickly. Fire shifts by tens of meters. The bracket closes. The German column is forced into predictable positions, stopping points, turn points, choke points that the defense already understands. This is not an even duel. It is a method. The Germans are not defeated by a single decisive blow. They are reduced, piece by coordination, by tempo, by a calm refusal to fight on the enemy's preferred terms. The armored group had been sent to impose control through mass and movement. Instead, it is being handled like material on a conveyor belt. Separated. A tank in open country can choose its angles. Here it cannot. The ground itself becomes an accomplice to the ambush. Soft fields that swallow weight, drainage ditches that cut like trenches, hedgerows that rise like walls and reduce vision to a narrow slit of forward motion. The armored group is forced onto lanes and bends that have been measured already, every curve a pre-registered killing point. Attempts to maneuver off the road look promising for a moment, then fail. A driver pushes into a field and feels the earth give way. Tracks bite and spin, churning mud instead of moving steel. Another tank tries to skirt a ditch, only to expose its side to a gun waiting at exactly that angle. A third climbs a bank too steep, belly armor scraping, suspension straining, and becomes a stationary target in the worst possible posture. The wrecks accumulate. A disabled vehicle is not merely a loss, it is an obstacle no one can bypass. In narrow lanes, one burning tank becomes a wall. Behind it, other tanks stack up, unable to spread, unable to retreat quickly, unable to turn without presenting flanks. The terrain turns each casualty into a multiplier. Recovery attempts begin, then collapse. A towing vehicle moves forward, cables prepared, crews working with practiced speed. But artillery pressure makes the effort suicidal. Shells fall on the obvious point of activity. Smoke and fragments drive men away. Recovery vehicles, rare and valuable, are hit trying to save what cannot be saved. Command begins to lose the ability to reposition. Orders are issued, but the ground does not cooperate. A unit cannot shift left when left is a bog and right is a ditch and forward is a burning chokepoint. In this terrain, control is not a matter of will. It is a matter of space, and the space has been denied. The battlefield becomes a corridor of attrition. Not because the Germans lack courage or machines, but because the environment offers no escape from observation, no room for surprise, no maneuver that is not already predictable. Steel is strongest when it can move. Here, the land itself makes movement a trap. Inside the tank, the first sensation is not fire. It is impact, an abrupt, crushing blow that feels like the hull has been struck by a giant hammer. The sound is wrong. Not the sharp crack of an explosion, but the groan of metal deforming under force. The vehicle shudders. Instruments flicker. For a fraction of a second, nothing else happens. Then the smoke arrives. It pours into the fighting compartment with unnatural speed, thick and acrid, turning breath into pain. The air tastes of fuel, burned paint, and hot oil. The crew coughs instinctively, voices lost in the sudden roar of internal chaos. Training demands reports, but lungs demand air. The commander has seconds to choose. Stay in position, keep the gun firing, trust that the armor will hold long enough to matter, or abandon the vehicle before it becomes a furnace. The decision is not philosophical. It is visceral, shaped by heat rising under boots and the growing certainty that something is very wrong. Escape hatches resist. Metal has warped under the blast. Tolerance is gone. A hatch opens only partway. Hands slip on hot steel. One man kicks desperately while another pushes, their movements frantic but coordinated by necessity rather than order. At last, one crewman spills out. He drops into the dirt half-blind, helmet gone, uniform smoldering. He clutches a folded map without knowing why, an instinctive grasp for something familiar. Behind him, smoke pours from the open hatch, carrying the shape of men still inside. Machine gun fire snaps overhead. Medics cannot reach him. No one can. The ground around the tank is swept by bullets and fragments, a narrow island of survival surrounded by lethal space. The wounded man crawls, then stops, pressed flat, waiting for a moment that does not come. From the outside, the tank is just another wreck in the lane. From the inside, it is a world collapsing in seconds. In that confined space, the abstraction of armor, doctrine, and momentum vanishes. What remains is heat, fear, and the brutal arithmetic of time. This is the cost, measured one crew at a time. In armored warfare, steel is only half the weapon. The other half is the network, voices, codes, brief messages that turn scattered vehicles into a single organism. As long as the radios hold, a unit can lose tanks and still remain a force. When the net breaks, the armor becomes isolated machinery. It begins with overload. Calls stack on top of calls. Reports arrive half-finished, drowned out by interference, clipped by fear or sudden movement. A platoon leader tries to describe a gun position, another cuts in with a casualty report, a third shouts for smoke. Nothing is wrong with the sets themselves. The collapse is human, too many emergencies at once, too little shared picture. Battalion-level orders come late, then contradict what crews can see. A message says to push forward when the road ahead is blocked by wreckage. Another says to withdraw when withdrawal lanes are already shelled. Some commanders interpret silence as permission to act independently. Others wait for clarity that never arrives. The result is divergence. One group reverses under smoke while another surges ahead, each convinced it is obeying the intent of the mission. In the haze, silhouettes appear and vanish. Turrets swing toward movement, uncertain whether it is enemy or friendly. Near misses of friendly fire multiply, shells passing too close, machine gun bursts checked at the last second. The enemy senses the change. Artillery returns with renewed precision, not random pressure, but deliberate exploitation. Fire strikes the seams, the places where units attempt to regroup, where vehicles cluster for protection, where command tanks would naturally be found. And then it happens, the moment the armored group stops behaving like one body. There is no longer a coherent front, only pockets of resistance. No longer an attack, only vehicles reacting. Radios still speak, but the words no longer create unity. This is the turning point. The order to withdraw arrives as an acknowledgement, not a solution. By the time it is given, the battlefield has already moved beyond the idea of an organized retreat. Routes that once promised escape are now under observed fire. Junctions are cratered. Lanes are marked by burning wrecks that cannot be pushed aside without time and cover that no longer exist. Damaged tanks begin to block the roads. A vehicle loses power while reversing and dies across the lane. Another throws a track trying to turn under pressure. Each failure turns withdrawal into a queue, each minute spent stationary drawing artillery and anti-tank fire like a signal flare. Crews make decisions in isolation. Some abandon their vehicles the moment movement stops, unwilling to die sealed inside steel that has already proven vulnerable. Others stay too long, hopping recovery vehicles will reach them, hopping for smoke, hopping for a break that never comes. Those recovery vehicles, rare, slow, indispensable, are hit as soon as they appear. Steel is left behind not because it is useless, but because it is unreachable. Small groups begin moving on foot. Tank crews, trained to fight from armor, now crawl through ditches and hedgerows, carrying sidearms and maps that no longer correspond to the situation. Officers try to gather men, but ranks and units have dissolved. Survival replaces formation. What remains of the armored group loses its defining feature, its heavy punch. The retreat continues, but not as a movement of force. It is a series of escapes, withdrawals measured in individuals rather than kilometers. Vehicles that do get away are damaged, low on ammunition, shaken crews inside them. Hours earlier, the unit had been sent forward to stop and advance. Now, what pulls back carries no momentum, no cohesion, no authority over the ground it leaves behind. This is not a retreat in the doctrinal sense. It is the end of an armored group as a fighting instrument. What survives is something smaller, quieter, and far less whole. What returns from the battlefield does not look like a unit. Survivors appear in ones and twos, not in columns. A lone tank limps into a rear area missing a track, turrets scarred and optics gone, its crew silent and older than they were that morning. Another arrives on a tow cable, engine dead, armor burned black around hastily painted numbers that no longer matter. Some do not return in vehicles at all. They arrive on foot, exhausted, coated in dust and smoke, uniforms torn by hedgerow thorns and shell fragments. They carry no heavy weapons, only sidearms and the weight of what they have seen. When asked where their tanks are, the answers are brief and final. Commanders begin the accounting. They count hulls, then crews. Numbers are written down, erased, written again. The losses are not only heavy, they are unbalanced. Tanks without crews, crews without tanks, vehicles that might be repairable if time existed, but time does not. Ammunition has been burned in volumes that produced noise rather than effect. Fuel tanks are empty from hours of futile movement. The armored group's identity dissolves into paperwork. Unit names survive on forms, but on the ground they no longer correspond to formations. Platoons exist as memory. Companies are theoretical. What had been a fresh group hours earlier is now a collection of remnants awaiting reassignment or absorption. And while this accounting takes place, the reason for the counterattack becomes painfully clear. The Allied advance it was meant to stop has not slowed. It has flowed around the wreckage, using the same roads now marked by German losses. Time, the one thing the armored group was meant to buy, has been lost instead. This is the consequence that begins before anyone has time to reflect. A counterattack does not merely fail. It returns as absence of steel, of men, of belief in the solutions that were. Losses can be counted in wrecks and names. But the true cost reveals itself in the days that follow, when headquarters tries to pretend the counterattack was only a local setback and discovers that it has torn a hole in the entire system. Replacement tanks are scarce. Factories are bombed, rail lines strained, depots emptied faster than they can be refilled. Even when a hull can be found, a trained crew cannot. Armor is not simply steel. It is men who know each other's voices, who react without debate, who have learned what panic feels like and how to keep moving through it. Repair units are overwhelmed. Workshops fill with damaged vehicles that might be saved under different circumstances. But the front has moved, artillery threat shifts closer, and evacuation routes grow uncertain. Some tanks are stripped for parts, cannibalized to keep a few running while the rest become dead stock. To plug the failure, German lines thin elsewhere. Units are pulled from neighboring sectors, gaps opened, risk accepted. A failed counterattack is never confined to its own map square. It creates a need, new defenses, new reserves, new improvisation, and every solution steals strength from another place. Meanwhile, Allied momentum accelerates. Every hour the Germans spend recovering from this defeat is an hour the enemy spends consolidating gains, bringing forward supply, registering artillery, and preparing the next push. The front becomes less a line than a moving pressure. Staff officers rewrite plans around shortages. What was once an option becomes impossible. Timetables change. The language shifts from counterattack to delay, from restore to hold, from hold to avoid encirclement. And with each adjustment, morale frays, not through sudden collapse, but through the quiet realization that fresh no longer means strong. It means inexperienced. It means replaceable on paper, but irreplaceable in reality. When the reports are gathered and the smoke is gone from the road, the failure becomes easier to describe than to accept. The armored group had been fresh, new crews, new machines, and it was used immediately as a tool, not nurtured as a force. War allows little patience, but it punishes those who treat untested units as finished instruments. What looked like strength was only potential, thrown into a fight that required hardened instinct. Doctrine demanded decisive action. German planning still carried the memory of earlier years, when bold armored movement could rewrite a battlefield in hours. That memory had become a habit. Even when conditions no longer favored it, when Allied guns, artillery, and air-ground coordination had matured, the reflex remained. Counterattack, restore, reassert control. But the Allies were not fighting the German tanks as isolated targets. They fought systems. They treated roads as choke points, radios as nervous systems, tempo as a weapon. They did not need to win a romantic duel of armor. They needed to separate the force, freeze it, deny it options, and destroy it at the points where it could not move or think as one. The Germans, meanwhile, fought an image of the battlefield. They fought what maps suggested, what doctrine promised, what pride insisted must be true. They acted on assumptions, about enemy hesitation, about the safety of speed, about the readability of terrain, long after the ground itself had disproven them. Innovation favored coordination over bravery. Courage was present in the burning lanes. It always is. But bravery cannot substitute for visibility and cannot replace cohesion. The lesson arrives, as it often does in war, with cruel clarity. Decisive action is not decisive when the enemy controls the terms. War punishes those who confuse movement with control. The counterattack failed not because tanks were weak, but because the thinking behind them was late. When the fighting finally moves on, the road junction is quiet again. Burned-out hulls sit where they stopped, steel cooled and split, their shapes now part of the landscape. Tracks lie twisted in ditches. Turrets point in meaningless directions, frozen mid-search for an enemy that never revealed itself. The ground bears the marks of where an advance was meant to be stopped, and where something else was lost instead. The armored group exists now only in fragments. In scattered vehicles pulled back for repair. In casualty lists typed cleanly far from the sound of fire. In the memories of survivors who remember the first impact more clearly than any order they received. What had been a coherent force survives as reports, spare parts, and men reassigned to other units. The enemy advance continues. Not with drama, but with method. Bridges secured, roads cleared, guns moved forward. The wreckage left behind is not an obstacle, it is evidence. Evidence that resistance came and failed and could not be repeated in the same way. German command absorbs the lesson too late. Freshness is not readiness. New steel does not equal cohesion. In modern war, armor is not just thickness of plate or size of gun. It is shared awareness, disciplined communication, and the ability to act as one body under pressure. Without cohesion, even the strongest machines return broken. Those who survived carry a quieter truth with them. They know that the moment of failure was not the first explosion, nor the order to withdraw, but the instant the unit lost the ability to see the battlefield clearly together. They were sent forward to stop and advance,